Welcome to Sunday Politics South. My name's Peter Henley. On today's show, most councils have now agreed their budgets for next year, and it looks like all of us will be getting bigger council tax bills. But is endlessly increasing what the little people pay the best way to finance local government? More on that in a moment. First, let's meet the two politicians for the next 20 minutes. Molly Scott-Cato is the Green Party MEP for the South West of England. Welcome, Molly. Royston Smith, the Conservative MP for Southampton Itchen. Should we still be giving money to Oxfam? Royston, you're on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I mean, you know, Oxford-based, very topical this week.
Well, it is, and you know, the more revelations that come out from not just Oxfam but from others, the more shocking it is. And I think that the Secretary of State is absolutely right that unless we have transparency, unless the act is cleaned up, then some of that money may not be going in the same direction that it has in the past. And
I'm talking about the people who are cancelling the direct debits. Do you give to Oxfam?
I don't. I give to other charities, not Oxfam. But it's not. People aren't just cancelling their direct debits, are they? Because some people are actually giving donations because they're offsetting that. They see that Oxfam is struggling. They are, yeah. So there are two trains of thought. But I also think that it's right that the government should be demanding a certain level of behaviour from those organisations, and that's not unreasonable to ask.
What do you think?
I think it is quite shocking what's emerged about the behaviour of some senior aid workers, and I think we do expect higher standards from them than we do expect from other people in society, and that's probably right.
But if we punish the charity.
Well, if we stop giving, then we know that the vulnerable people that they support right across the world are going to lose out, and actually I was one of those people that gave a donation because I was very worried about other people cancelling their direct debits.
Right. In the longer term, do you think that we should be using aid in the way that we are at the moment? It's almost like we're demanding something in return.
I don't think it was a coincidence that it was the very week that Jacob Rees-Mogg went to Downing Street with a petition to stop giving 0.7% of GDP in aid that this scandal came out.
Really?
So I think, yes, I think it's politically motivated, and I think it's a great shame, and I think we've been a generous country. We see, really, the smarter people see that if you don't help countries in the poorer parts of the world, then ultimately that will knock back in terms of foreign policy, in terms of migration and so on. So it's sensible, actually, to support them.
There's been this constant drumbeat, whether or not this particular revelation came out at a certain time. Do you think we should be spending so much on foreign aid?
Foreign aid is very important. We have a moral obligation to people that are struggling to look after themselves. Everyone would agree with that, I'm sure. We talk about people coming here as economic migrants, and yet if we make their countries of origin stronger, then they may not feel that they need to do that. And ultimately, for people that are concerned about whether this is a donation that we never get anything back from, if we can make those economies stronger, then maybe we can trade with them in the future. So there are lots of good reasons for doing it, not just the moral dimension. But I have to say, I think that is a dreadful slur to suggest that this is somehow politically motivated. People have been talking about the 0.7% arbitrary figure of GDP for aid for years, and other arbitrary figures. But, well, are you suggesting that somebody... Well, these revelations are revelations. No one told people... No one told them some time ago to behave in the way that they did. The fact the timing is irrelevant. If they hadn't behaved in a particular way, it was never going to come out, was it?
We can agree it certainly needs addressing.
Well, I'm glad to hear this view, and a lot of Conservatives take that sensible position, but I'm quite worried that some are deliberately attacking the aid budget at the moment.
Now, student tuition fees were back in the headlines this week, partly because a lot of students were demanding refunds for missed tuition when their lecturers went out on strike on Thursday. But partly also because at the beginning of the week, the government announced a year-long review of university funding, with tuition fees up for discussion. One of the many people not happy with the current arrangements is Estelle Clark, who's a finance lawyer and also on the board of the Intergenerational Foundation. Is university education in the UK too expensive, as the Prime Minister was suggesting?
Yeah, it's ridiculously expensive for students and also for the nation, because it costs everybody this great expense. But there are three key issues with the university costs. Obviously, the interest rates, which are 6.1% compounded monthly, so not just a normal interest rate.
Only for the very highest earners, though.
No,
it's on a sliding scale, isn't it?
All the interest is compounded.
But the 6% isn't charged to everybody.
No, the 6.1% is charged over the upper threshold, but it's charged to absolutely everybody while they're at university until the end of the March following the year in which they graduate. So in that first period of time, while people are studying and they can do absolutely nothing about it, they're charged 6.1% monthly compounded. And you know what the impact of compounding monthly means. It means that over a period of time, the loan effectively gets multiplied and gets extended. So a loan which would start out as being about £50,000 over a period of time would morph into a loan which is about £200,000.
I think if you thought about the amounts that were being borrowed, you'd be very scared. And people sign up for stuff and then it gets changed, which wouldn't happen in any other finance agreement. But 3/4 of people aren't expected to pay it off because it's all wiped out once you're 30.
Well, this is a specious argument suggesting that the system is OK just because everything gets written off. Well, what is being written off is the compounded monthly interest and extortionate rate which is being tacked onto the loans by the present system. If we did not have the 6.1% compounded monthly amounts being added to the loans, and if we had grants instead of maintenance loans, then many more people would pay off their loans and we wouldn't have this terrible danger of the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room at the moment is mental ill health. And this elephant is getting bigger and bigger.
There's a lot of student suicides, aren't there?
There are, and there is without doubt a link between...
You think that's a pressure, that because they feel that they've paid for their education? I mean, it has changed people's attitudes to degrees, no question.
Yeah.
But you think that's a burden that they then carry and that affects their mental health?
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
There's plenty of research out there and the research is very interesting. An important piece of research is the fact that students who are less well off, people who are less well off, are more debt averse. So the more debt averse people are graduating with more than double the amount of debt.
Well, that doesn't explain why there are still just as many people from that background wanting to go to university and get a degree.
Shall I tell you why?
Oh,
It's
go on.
because they do not understand about the costs until they are there. Because
That's a bit patronising, isn't it?
no, it's not patronising at all, because no one understands. Because very few people understand about compound monthly interest that's
Right.
compounded monthly, and students do not have it explained to them. They are not given a loan
Take
agreement.
it on trust. And also, they're not
They
explaining
do
the
take it on
parental
trust.
contribution. I've heard Martin Lewis talking about this as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because parents don't realise that they are expected to contribute, and the government doesn't really spell it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happens is that we've got a vicious circle, haven't we? Because
Yeah.
we've got students who are not being given enough maintenance in any event. They're having to work while they're at university. They're graduating with horrendous amount of debts, which they know full well they can't pay off.
And then they can't afford to buy a house either. I
Exactly
could see
right.
the intergenerational issue. Royston, it's a mess. The Prime Minister's pretty much admitting as much, isn't she?
I think she's admitting that we need to review it. I think there are several aspects of it that need to change. I'm and on record, so this isn't after Estelle has made her very eloquent contribution
Analysis.
there. Is
I
that well that
the more you look into it.
the interest rate is something that I've always felt was unfair and unjust. But people paying is not something that I think is unfair and unjust. I was speaking to someone just the other day who was a doctor, and he will earn, I don't know, 100,000 a year. He's a consultant. And the people that work in Starbucks, who are never going to make more than £20,000 a year, would otherwise have to pay for his tuition fees. Now, the flip side argument is he will say, well, I'm a doctor and I'm going to fix you up in the event that you're not well, and therefore you should make a contribution. I've heard all those arguments, but I come down on the argument that by going to university and doing a degree, and more people from disadvantaged backgrounds going than ever before, given the opportunity to earn more throughout the lifetime of their career, is the right thing to do.
Right. Do you think we're going to have to stop this whole system, which is what the Prime Minister's suggesting?
I do. I think it's completely unfair. I agree with Estelle. My daughter's 23. She's going out into life with a £50,000 debt. I feel ashamed of that as a mother, actually, and I think we should be ashamed of that as a society.
It's not a debt, is it? It is in the undergraduate tax.
Well, hang on. It's a debt she's carrying. That money will be taken out of her earnings once she's earning enough. It's totally changed her approach to life. She doesn't think about acquiring assets. In fact, young people are much more willing now to take on even greater debts. If you're in Scotland, if you're in Scandinavia, you pay nothing for your education. In civilised societies, it's considered to be a social benefit. I think we should think about it like that. It will cost £8 billion a year to relieve all young people of this pressure of debt. That's about
Would
the
that
same
have
as...
to be backdated? would you have to...
So
going right back to anybody who's borrowed for a student loan?
The £8 billion is about the same as the tax break we give every year to aviation by not putting a tax on fuel. So I think we could easily find that money. And it's about 80 billion to take away all student debt that's already there, including my daughter, which would be wonderful. And I think in order to repay that, we're just going to have to stretch it over quite a long time period. But it's perfectly affordable, and I think we should commit to doing that.
Yeah, it's you're interested in the generation thing as well, because a lot of young people aren't able to buy houses.
Absolutely right.
So could the money come from that in some way?
What, from the housing?
Well, yes. The fact is that people who've had free education, me, you know, go on to also own property and see that increase in value, whereas anybody under 30, under 40, you know.
Well, I'd like to answer a point that Royston made, if I may. And Royston was suggesting that it's fair for people to pay for their education. And I'd like to make the point that, in actual fact, high earners already do pay for their education because they are taxed. And in any event, when we're talking about education and student loans, we're not talking about some frivolous little extra. We're talking about absolutely essential needs that we have. Well,
you just take it out of the general income, then? Just take it out of income tax or something like that, would you? This is, or aviation or...
Corporation tax, I think, would be a sensible way of funding the education in this country, because when you look at the benefit of graduates go into business, and a lot of businesses make an enormous amount of money from graduates. Businesses are not taxed very heavily in this country at all, and they can afford it. And an additional interesting point on this is that we're talking about how much it's going to cost to get rid of it. The annual mental ill health bill is 100 billion.
Right.
A part of that is because of students' debts.
Right. You made a lot of interesting thoughts there.
Thank you.
Let me throw some more numbers at you, though. 95% of local authorities are looking to put up their council tax bills this year. 93% of them planning to increase other charges that they levy. Yet 80% of councils also say they are worried about balancing the books. So have we got what we actually need to finance local government? Our Hampshire and Isle of Wight reporter Hannah Bewley has been having a rummage around through the town hall coffers.
When it comes to talking about councils, a lot of big numbers get brought up. These can have a huge impact on us, the little people. So, what does your local council do for you?
So rubbish collection, recycling, organise housing for people who can't afford it.
Smartening the place up enormously.
Your amenities, your refuse collecting.
Support for the elderly.
And how is it funded?
The public at large, through council rates and so on.
Through council tax, obviously.
Any other ways?
Well, parking fines.
Fundraising, maybe? And maybe from the government? Out of the rates that you pay.
And of course business rates to a certain extent, and although that's a very complicated subject.
Put simply, councils currently get their funding from council tax, from business rates, and from grants from central government. This is then used for local services in our cities, towns, and villages. Such as care for the elderly and vulnerable children, schools, registering deaths and marriages, roads and footpaths, licensing parks, and planning. Got that? But the government wants to change how all of this is funded. The government wants to remove the grant from Westminster and instead allow councils to keep more of the business rates they collect in their area, and is allowing councils to raise council tax by more each year before a local referendum is triggered. Councils are also becoming more creative in the ways they bring in revenue, such as investing in property and raising charges for local services.
So what's the history of the building?
East Hampshire District Council is bucking the trend and is one of very few authorities not to be raising council tax this year.
And what we've done, instead of building a wonderful glass and steel structure, we've taken on this old Zurich building, made a few tweaks, but really made sure we don't waste taxpayers' money in luxury gold-plated surroundings.
But is investing in property with public money a good idea?
We take the same advisors as all the big national property companies, and we hold for a 25, 30-year period. So with those income streams, we're already getting in £6.5 million a year, which is actually in itself more than we get from council tax already. And another big component is selling services. So we have over £10 million of service income now.
Let's not forget, it's estimated councils will be £16 billion worse off by 2020 than they were a decade ago. Councils say adult social care is the top long-term financial pressure, with up to 40% of their budgets being spent on care. Northamptonshire County Council recently had to bring in emergency controls due to severe financial pressures, the first to do so in 20 years. And it's feared they could just be the tip of the iceberg.
Undeniably, there is still a gap to plug. Most councils will forecast some sort of deficit by 2020, and they're putting in place plans to meet that. Some of which would be a reduction in services, some of which would be an increase in tax revenue, including council tax as well as the business rates. So yes, we could see both those things happening. Higher amounts of council tax and business rate tax, combined with some reduction in services.
Would you be able to do this if you were a bigger council and if you had the responsibility of adult social care and children's services?
Do you know, one of our key investments here is in the attitude of our staff, and attitude is important no matter how big your council is. But also adult social care, let's look at something new. We're reinventing district council services. Let's reinvent adult social care with maybe up to the government where the National Health Service resides, or maybe down to somewhere like us with a more forensic view of where the money needs to be spent.
So, still more questions than answers. The government says no council will be worse off under the new system and wants councils to keep 75% of business rates by 2021. But how this is done fairly is yet to be worked out. For now, we, the little people, will be paying bigger bills.
It feels like we're the little people being squeezed for money again. I mean, in general, the Green Party likes to see more taxation, don't you? I mean, this 6%, that's... everybody's going to have to pay that.
I think, you know, it depends how you tax. You've got to be strategic about tax. And the worry here is that although local government has been the most efficient part of government, it's borne the brunt of the cuts. So you've seen the revenue support grant fall from 10 billion in 2015. It's going to be almost nothing by next year. And essentially, local government is responsible for the most expensive services, like you saw in the film with social care. You know, there's not much you can do to make those more efficient. You need the carers there, housing as well, another very important.
Carers are people going to have to pay extra council tax now, aren't they? They're not getting a 6% increase in their wage.
Because national government has been ideological about austerity, but it's put the burden of austerity onto local government, which has to run those services. And I think we
just
need
to make them take the blame?
Well, I think we need to see a power shift there. We need to see local government having more control over its money, and actually what's happening here is less money is coming back to local government, and actually they're going to have to be doing what the government wants in order to get specific grants, and I think that disempowers local government further.
So they're not really getting more control if they're allowed to keep business rates?
Well, the business rates, obviously that depends what kind of an authority you are. So some of the poorest authorities, which have the largest need for services, whether it's housing or whether it's social care, and people can't afford to pay for their own social care, they will be in areas where it's more difficult to have thriving businesses and to bring those business rates in. So that's just going to exacerbate inequalities. I know it hasn't been resolved how that will be, how that money will be shared, but that, you know, particularly in a party political situation, you can see that the Conservatives, that sounds like a great policy if you're in, you know, leafy South East, but it's not so great if you're in Huddersfield.
They've made efficiencies, Royston, and you ran a council, you made lots of efficiencies. You've got to be able to see it from the other side of the coin, and now they're just being dumped on for whilst the cost of social care is going up.
Dumped on?
The cuts, the revenue support grant going down.
Revenue support grant's going down, new homes bonus is going up, business rates retention is going up, grants for specifics like air quality, social care, homelessness going up. There are grants coming from central government.
6% increase in council tax.
Well, no, that's a choice. That's a choice.
No, it's not. They're all doing it.
Well, that's still a choice. Otherwise, Ferris Cowper, you just put onto your clip there, would be putting his up. And
he's just a small district council which is getting a lot of money from extra fees.
Firstly, they're not all doing it. It's a choice. Now, what you need to do if you're a leader of a council or anyone else is you need to prioritise. Now, I suggest that if Southampton had built more houses, if they had redeveloped more council estates, as I was doing when I was leader of the council, they'd have more new homes bonus and they'd be able to invest that wisely. And the more businesses they attract to the city to come and locate and relocate here, the more business rates they would get. There are mechanisms by way you can...
Have they?
Of course they've got real freedom. You know, if you're going to keep 70% of your business rates, ultimately perhaps 100%, then you have the freedom to encourage people to locate their businesses in Southampton, and you have the opportunity to take their business rates and spend it as you see fit. That's a big freedom. You know, one of the things that people used to say to me is, why don't we have big events anymore? Why don't we have a round-the-world yacht race or a balloon festival on the Common? And the problem is that the local authority, the taxpayer, the people that are struggling, they pay for those events, and then other people, hoteliers, bars, restaurants, they all do very nicely from it. Now, if you want to encourage more businesses to come and locate here, and then you can use their business rates perhaps to drive your own economy on balloon festivals and round-the-world yacht races, then that's for you to choose. At the moment, you don't get a choice. You get a revenue support grant and grants made up by government.
Yeah. I'd like you to carry on arguing. We don't have time. We'll come back. Now, a regular roundup of the political week in the South. We've squeezed it into 60 seconds. A farmer from Wiltshire has been elected the first female leader of the National Farmers Union. Minette Batters lives at Downton near Salisbury. Oxford City Council's being accused of bias after refusing an anti-Brexit campaign bus permission to park in Broad Street next week. Perhaps they could take a cable car. In Oxford? Yes, really. The idea is being floated by the Green Party.
It's about a third to a quarter of the cost of even road building.
The County Council are interested-ish.
Is it such a fanciful idea?
Well, is it?
That's the question.
Even less comfortable, the seats on new trains for the Thames Valley and Sussex. After some passengers complained it was like sitting on an ironing board, the industry's to research new cushions.
A bit tough on the old bottom.
Could do with a rethink.
Finally, 2 new robot teachers have been helping autistic youngsters improve communication skills at a school in Berkshire.
Hello, my name is Steve.
All sorts of good ideas around, from robots to cable cars. Ian Hudspeth didn't seem quite so convinced. Is Brexit going to give us the spirit of innovation?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Well, I think at least we got a bit of conciliation yesterday at Chequers, if we're to believe what we've heard. But the problem is, I think they've agreed they want their cake and eat it, and when they go to negotiate with the EU, that's not going to get them very far.
So we're going to be back to square one?
I think, yes. I mean, the conflict in the cabinet is extreme, and basically whichever side they come down on, one half will disagree, and anyway what they're proposing at the moment is totally unacceptable to the EU.
It's going to be agreed at the last hour. I think we all agree that, don't we?
Well, I think everything's agreed at the last hour. The negotiation takes us up to the last hour. Never known a negotiation that's been agreed 6 months ahead of when it's required. So I'm expecting it to be in the last hour, but, you know, I'm very encouraged from what's been happening in Chequers. The Prime Minister is going to make a speech next week, which I think is going to also be very encouraging. And I'm optimistic about it. Even if I was a Remainer, and I call myself a sort of a moderate Brexiteer, but even if I was a Remainer,
I was in the once.
That's calling for a referendum, Peter.
Oh, right.
That was a difference.
That is different.
That's
right,
so yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
So there we are. We agree. We agree.
That's where we'll end it.
Stop. We agreed.
All right. That's the Sunday Politics in the South. Thank you to my guests, Molly Scott-Cato from the Green Party and Royston Smith. Now it's back to Sarah.